Okay, so today we're going to talk about workflow, which is actually the second day we're going to be talking about workflow because yesterday I recorded the video and the audio didn't record. Yeah, that happened. So we're going to try it again. Right, so with workflow there is kind of three key points I want to talk about. So first one is hardware, second one is software, and the third one is you, the user. So what we want is a system that works as fluidly and efficiently as possible. What we get in our mind straight into the DAW as quickly as possible. So first one being hardware. At the very heart of every studio is a computer. There are a couple of important parts with this. First one being your memory, and the other one being RAM. Think of memory like your blood in your body. The more you have, the better. If you don't have enough, you're gonna die. And think of RAM like the arteries in your heart. There's a lot of biological references, but we want as much there so that we can run as much blood through your computer as possible. If you have quite a few samples in your DAW or quite a few engines running at the same time and you don't have enough RAM, the thing will crash and die, which is what happened to my last laptop. So high memory is always important. High RAM, especially if you're using a lot of stuff, you need RAM, which incidentally is why gaming computers are quite cool. But if you run Logic, for example, that's not an option. You have to use Mac. Little side note with the memory thing, do not rely just on one form of memory. So that's tangible and intangible. If you're using a cloud for all your memory, if your internet crashes or your internet provider does something so you don't have access to the internet, you can't access any of your stuff. So make sure you have a tangible form of memory where you can access everything. But also, don't rely just on that, because if you lose hard drives, that's it, they're gone, and they're arguably more difficult to replace. So have backups as well. The second part of a studio or studio workflow is your speakers. Speakers are arguably as important as your computer. They are the things that tell you what you've made. So having high quality speakers is very, very important. Notice I didn't say high price. Just because something is expensive doesn't mean it's good. Just because something's cheap doesn't mean it's bad. There are a lot of speakers out there and they're all different. We all have different ears. We find the ones that resonate, no pun intended, the ones that are best suited for our ears. So spend the time, do the research, listen to them before you buy them. I use KRK's 7s, which are pretty cool. They're a little bassy, but I like it a little bassy. On the back of them, there is a little LED screen where you can change some of the settings of the speakers. So you can adjust them to the room that you're in and to your personal taste, which I think is really cool. The third part is your audio interface. That is what is going to receive a lot of stuff. It's going to be responsible for your speakers and your recording. So having a good quality audio interface is going to benefit you a lot. Again, there are so many. So finding the one that best suits you is hugely important, because that's probably one of the things that you're not going to change for quite some time. With audio interfaces, they come in all different shapes and sizes and they have a bunch of different functions. So with mine, I've got a Scarlett 2i2. It has two inputs because I can only record physically two things at one time, and one of them has to be vocals. I can't record two guitars at the same time. That will not go very well. But if you're someone who has a small band, for example, they want to record guitar, piano, vocals and bass at the same time, have an audio interface that can support that. You do not have to go overboard and have 16 or 32 inputs unless you are going to use them. There is something to be said about investing in a 4 input or 8 input audio interface, for example, if you are interested in recording that number of instruments at some point. There is no point buying something that is completely unnecessary for your own workflow. So it would be silly of me to buy a 8 input or 16 or 32 input audio interface when it's just me. Number 4 is, actually I'm going to say the keyboard and the mouse. Whenever we start out, we always start out with the same thing, the computer and one of these, which is painful half the time. And we also have the mouse. With the keyboard, there's not much you can do about it in terms of a hardware improvement, but you can learn the shortcuts. So read the manual for whatever DAW you have. If you are in Pro Tools or Logic, there are shortcuts independent for those ones. So just because you have the shortcuts for Logic down, they are not the same as Pro Tools. So keep that in mind. Mouse, I did change, and I think it's pretty cool. Again, you don't have to go as crazy as a gaming mouse with all the different buttons, but having the extra buttons on a mouse is actually quite useful. I've got the Logitech MX Master 3 for Mac, obviously. Come on, focus. There we go. Alright, so there's one of those. I've got the vertical adjustment as normal, but I've also got a little horizontal one so I can easily see my whole session. I've also got 5 extra buttons so I can stop, play, and change some of the functions in my DAW just from the mouse. So if I need to do any quick adjustments, I don't have to use anything else. I don't have to use the MIDI keyboard or the faders or the keyboard. I can just do it from the mouse, which is pretty easy. Something that not a lot of people are going to have, and I recommend that you look at one, is a fader. Now, you probably don't need one unless you are recording quite a large session, but even then, it is very cool to have, because the problem with dealing with a keyboard and a mouse is a lot of adjustments, a lot of production work is done by looking at the screen, which is not what we want to do. We do not want to mix music with our eyes. I know that if I open up a session, which I have now, if I pan something 15 to the left, my brain immediately wants to pan something 15 to the right, because that is mathematically balanced. And that's not how sound works. That's not how instruments are going to work. Trying to do things with numbers is not going to really make a great mix. So having a way to remove the eyes from that equation is going to make your mix sound a lot better. So I've got a solid state Logic UF8. I've also got the UC1, which is kind of like a very compact studio desk. I've got all the essentials, all the best bits from a traditional studio desk on my little desk, which is really cool and very, very functional and very well made. Actually feels like a proper studio desk, which is nice. It's got the faders, it's got the wheels above it, so I can literally listen to my mix and go, okay, well that needs to go down a little bit, and I can just go straight to the fader. I can go straight to the knobs, pan it whichever way I want, and I don't have to worry about the numbers. While we're on the note of the UF8, there is navigational tools, there's the recording tools, there's some of the stuff that is on my mouse. So if I'm working on the UF8, I can do a bunch of stuff. If I want to use the mouse for a bit, I don't have to go in between the two every single time, because there are some similarities. There are some buttons that do the same thing, which is great. Makes my desk and my workflow very accessible, which is the point I'm trying to make. The next thing is the MIDI keyboard. Now I have a Komplete, I don't know the names of this stuff. I've got the Komplete 49, 51, something like that. It's about 50 keys. It's enough keys for me to record wherever I want at any one time. I'm not a great keyboard player, so most of the time I'm recording one hand at a time. So I don't need anything bigger, but if I did want to record two hands at the same time, there is enough space for that. I don't want to have 120 keys, but at the same time I don't want to have a little 25 key thing. So when you're choosing a MIDI keyboard, choose one that is, one, the right size, and also has the functions and articulations that you want as well. The one I have only has one articulation wheel, and it's got a pitch bend. that doesn't quite work when recording strings, because there are quite a few articulations when you are recording those. So I've bought something from Monogram, which is coming in like 3 months because there's a delay. But that's really cool. I'll make a video about it later. That is... Oh no, there isn't. There's one more thing. With speakers, you've also got headphones. There are quite a few brands out there. The most common one that you'll see in most studios and what most people use is the Technica stuff. They are great, they're durable, come in a bunch of colors. They're great for a recording environment. So they're the M50X headphones. I've got a couple of pairs of those. Do not mix with headphones. There are headphones called open back headphones. They are made for mixing. You can obviously listen to your mix once it's done through the headphones, but I wouldn't try and mix things through recording headphones at least. Summary: computer, storage, tangible and intangible, have backups. Speakers, headphones, good quality. Audio interface, pick whichever is best suited to your work environment, what you are going to use, not what you would like to use. Faders, keyboards, mouse, something I would say look into. It's not a necessity, but it is something that I think is going to improve your workflow. So next thing, software. Now the most important piece of software in any studio is the DAW. So that is Pro Tools, that is Logic, that is Cubase, Fruity Loops, whatever else. There are dozens at this point. There's quite a few. Pro Tools obviously is the industry standard. There are a couple of reasons for this. If you are brave enough to try Pro Tools, or if you haven't dived into the great world of DAWs yet, try Pro Tools first. If you can get familiar with Pro Tools, it will do you a great service in the long run, because that is what studios use. So if you have the chance to work in a studio, that is what they're going to record, and if you are familiar with it, you're going to get more jobs. But that's not to disparage you from trying any other DAW. I got a Mac when I was 17, MacBook Pro. It had GarageBand, and it was just a natural progression to Logic. It's a very intuitive DAW. I think it's easy to work with, and the sound library's great. It comes with about 80 gigs worth of instruments and samples and stuff, which are very usable, which is really cool. The next software will be your sample library. There are hundreds of sample libraries out there, from big companies, from independent companies, just from people making stuff. And if you dive into that vast ocean, you might drown, but it's great because there's so many incredible things being done by so many people. Just to show you what I'm using, I have Native Instruments. They are a massive company. They make a lot of incredible things. It gets updated quite a lot, and any instrument that you could possibly think of is in that library. I got one of their packages, so it was like no less than 100 different instruments or engines, and inside those engines you've got another 200-300 sounds. So there's thousands, which is a good place to start. Kind of like a one for everything software. The other one is Spitfire Audio. Spitfire's greatest strength is their orchestral stuff. So their BBC Orchestra, the stuff that they do with Hans Zimmer. They've got a brand new one called Colossus, big orchestra, very punchy. If you're into writing scores or trailers and having a big dramatic sound, check them out because it's amazing. The other company that is worth talking about is Output. Output are really fun. They are the more experimental side. So Spitfire is your traditional stuff. Output's the complete opposite. They're experimental, they're creative, they're making engines that make sounds that you just can't think of. You have to go into their engines, find out what sounds you can make, and then write stuff from there. They've got a bass engine called Substance. There's a vocal engine called Exhale. There's one called Rev, which I use a lot. But all three of them, just because it's a bass engine doesn't mean it just plays bass. It does some weird synth stuff that you can turn into leads or accompaniments. The vocal stuff is not just a vocal line, it's effects, it's really ethereal ambient stuff as well. So there's a lot within those engines, and a lot of exploration to do, because there's a ton of parameters that you can then adjust and make completely different sounds to what you start with. So if you want something that you can experiment with for hours, check them out. The other company worth talking about is FabFilter. They are not a builder of sound libraries, they develop production and mastering tools. So your compressors, EQs, preamps, filters, they do all that stuff, and it just makes your mix sound better. It's like the icing on a cake. So something worth checking out. Native Instruments also have preamps and compressors and filters and all that kind of stuff, and Logic also has that in their sound library as well. So there are variations of those tools, but I think FabFilter is the best. That is probably it with software. Software is the easiest thing and the most complicated thing at the same time. Your DAW and then your sound library. Sounds simple enough, but there's so much inside of that, and that really comes down to you, what DAW best suits your workflow, what sound libraries are best suited to the music that you want to make. Me saying try output for all the experimental stuff when you don't use the experimental stuff. It's personal taste. So software summary, with your DAW, find the one that is going to be best suited to your workflow. With sound libraries, do the research, find the ones that you are going to use the most and that are best suited to the genres that you're interested in writing in. There really isn't that much else to the software. The third part, read the manuals. So much time could be saved if you read the manuals. So any gear, any hardware, any software, anything that you get, read the manuals. They will save you so much time and have a better understanding of what your stuff actually can do, and when you want to save stuff, when you want to change things, instead of going through it in the dark, you'll have some understanding of how it all works. So definitely spend the time going through them. It's not like terms and conditions where you just tick it. This is the stuff that people have spent a lot of time working on, and they want to explain how it works and all the different features, because there are things in the software that you're not going to find for quite some time if you don't read the manuals. There is stuff in Logic certainly that you don't even think about until you find it by accident. There's a lot of really cool gems within the sound libraries in the DAWs that you will find later on by accident, or if you read the manual, you'll find them straight away, and it will make your stuff a lot better. Next time we will go through some sound libraries that I think are pretty good. There's a couple of new things that have come out recently. Want to dive through those, and hopefully we'll get onto some hardware as well. But until then, I'll see you later.